5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
It's how I roll, a shooting star in a film noir. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground. I'm floating around 10 feet on the ground.
Hello. How are you folks tonight? Good to be here. Good to be alive. Glad to see you all. Thank you very much for coming in there. Charlotte J, Uncle Bones. Let's see, who else we got? John Ayers, nice to see you, bud. Jenky 144. I appreciate all you guys being returning participants. Really appreciate the help. As usual, I'll ask you to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification button so that you can automatically be reminded. And, hit some likes when we're talking about something that strikes your fancy. Hey, Carolina Puerto, ¿cómo está? Let's see, what else do we want to do? Today's show is going to be part 1. Oh, yes, caps. If you want to ask a question, I look for caps. Otherwise, you got chatting amongst yourself. If you're not putting your information in caps, it won't be put up as a question. No guarantee that it'll be put up a question, even if you cap it, because I may miss it. But I'll try my best. Hey, Craig, what's up? Seeing as Craig just came in, you can't really see it, but Craig is my research partner, and he was nice enough to find this turkey feather, and so I've added it to my ensemble on my hat. Thank you very much, Craig. I appreciate it. What an awesome research partner he is. This guy's hiking 15, 18 miles a day looking for Bigfoot. Incredible. I want to thank Alex Highcheck and Doug Highcheck for all their support. God knows where I'd be without Alex. Kind of celebrating my 10th episode. I've made it this far, so we'll see how I do up to 20 and hopefully keep on trucking along. Today's show is part 1 on minimizing bias in our Sasquatch or Bigfoot research. I hope that you field researchers find this interesting and helpful. There's a lot of forms of bias out there, and the first step in guarding against that bias is to, of course, be aware of it. As is my habit, I'm going to first tell a Bigfoot story. This is a personal one, and then we'll jump into the slides. This story is an expedition story, and it occurred on one of my initial expeditions. I got paired up with 2 very experienced researchers. The leader of the group told me, I'm putting you with my best researchers. And that's important to remember as the story goes on. So we went out we went out to a location that was kind of a point, a rocky point, kind of off, undercut and off a mountain, so that you could see the entire valley below. I've alluded to this area before. Beside it was a meadow that you could go down into, and if you went up and looked towards the valley from that meadow, you could see a massive trail, game trail, we call it a Sasquatch highway, running down the mountain and then across the river and then back up the side of the other mountain. And so we were posted out on this point, and it was three of us. Rightly so. One of us sat at 12 o'clock. I was sitting at 2 to 3 o'clock, and the other researcher or investigator was sitting at 10 o'clock, 10 or 11 o'clock. So we're trying to catch and use our peripheral vision to see things around us as well as what is in front of us. As we're looking up over the valley, you've heard me tell this part of the story before. We heard some coyotes cut loose. And then after the coyotes quieted down a bit, we heard this gargantuan Bigfoot yell. And that it turns out to be the first Bigfoot call, the first Bigfoot roar that I ever heard in Bigfooting. It's actually the last Bigfoot roar I heard live as well, interestingly enough. And at the time, I didn't even know better to know that it was a Bigfoot. We wrapped up the day, and I said to one of my one of the two other guys, I didn't really hear anything that was definitively Bigfoot. And I guess that showed my confirmation bias, because as I've come to listen to other Bigfoot roars online, it does have a distinct roar, and this was definitely a Bigfoot roar. But we were sitting out there on this point, and as you do, you look around. Sometimes you look up in the sky on the sides. We're going to be posted there for several hours. And one time when I looked up, I saw a lightning bug, and I'm not sure if lightning bugs are still out. I think it's probably getting too cold for them. But if you've ever watched a lightning bug fly, they kind of hover and just kind of float around and can stay in one position and may go up. They may go down sideways. And there were other lightning bugs out that night, but the lightning bug that caught my eye was a lightning bug. Instead of just gently and calmly hovering, this thing was doing loop-de-loops and zigzagging. It was coming down from above me, and it would dart this way, dart that way, do a loop, go up, go down, just acting like I've never seen any lightning bug act before. And I thought to myself, it looks like this lightning bug is injured, because although it was going all over the place, as time passed, it continued to descend in front of us. And I pointed it out to the experienced investigator on my left. Look at that lightning bug. Isn't that bizarre? And so he looks up and looks at it, and looks at it kind of coming towards us, and kind of gets wound up a little bit and said, that could be a mini orb. I said, no, that's a lightning bug. It continued that erratic behavior and got right in front of. He said, that's a lightning bug. That's a lightning bug. Write it down, because I was the recorder for our portion of our group. Write it down. No, it's not a lightning bug. And the thing zigzags down and lands right between my left foot and his right foot and blinks out. You write that down. That was a mini orb. It just absorbed into the ground. Write it down. This is one of my initial evaluations. I didn't know squat about Squatch, even though I was pretty sure it was a lightning bug. I'm not going to get into a debate with somebody that's been doing this 10 more years than I was. So I recorded the time, wrote it down, knowing still, feeling certain it was a lightning bug. And so a few minutes passed, and just kismet, synchronicity, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. At one point, the guy who was insisting that I write it down as a mini orb sitting beside me, him and I both looked down to the ground where we saw the mini orb absorb. And I'll be darned if that lightning bug didn't blink on again. And I looked at him and said, I told you so. And he kind of got a little bit embarrassed by it. But it showed his confirmation bias. And I don't bring this up. I'm keeping him anonymous. I'm not bringing this up to shame him. But in terms of perception and sensation, in terms of perception, context is everything. And I later discovered that he had recently had a harrowing Class A experience that involved losing control of one's body, as well as some mind speak. So this was quite a sighting. And ever since then, ever since that time, virtually anything that happened in the woods, he would immediately associate to Bigfoot. And if you've been out on enough Bigfoot expeditions, you're eventually going to run into orbs floating around. I have never heard or seen of a mini orb since then. But the point is he was rattled from that Class A that he had with 3 other people, and he developed a confirmation bias. As the night went on, he even heard a Sasquatch sneaking up behind us. And then he heard it running down to the meadow to our left, and got up, and we investigated. Yeah, look at this. I can't believe that Bigfoot snuck up on us. There was a little blind behind us. And so, again, not to shame this person or mock this person, this is a guy with 10 years with boots on the ground when this happened. And if confirmation bias can happen with somebody that experienced, it can certainly happen with anyone. I would also point out that in that case, his previous sighting was what was creating that confirmation bias. And one of the things I want to put to you and suggest to you is expeditions in themselves can create bias. You leave for home. I typically drive between 3 to 4 hours for an expedition. You're excited. You're pumped up. You want to see a Bigfoot. You're thinking Bigfoot all the way up there. You meet people. You're talking Bigfoot. You know, as you're divided into groups, the excitement builds. And, you know, you want to see a Bigfoot. Who doesn't want to have a Class A sighting? I've only met one person that would prefer not to have one. And so this can happen to the best of us. Again, this isn't an attempt to shame this guy or mock this guy. It can happen to the best of us because certain experiences in our life predispose us to perceiving things in a particular way. And so the title of today's show is Minimizing Bias in Sasquatch Research. I'm sorry. I know one of my regular viewers who's not here today because he's got bigger priorities has gotten tired of this joke. So rather than read it to you, I'll try and act it out a little bit because it's kind of a corny joke and kind of a boring joke as well. But there's a drunk guy kind of stumbling around under a street lamp as a policeman walks up to him. The policeman says, "Sir, you know, what are you looking for?" Well, I'm looking for my keys. I dropped my keys. And so the policeman starts helping the guy look for his keys. Some other bypassers come by, are bending around, looking around for the keys, not finding the keys. And after a few minutes of looking, he asks the drunk, "Are you sure you lost them here?" The drunk says, No, I didn't lose them here. I lost them in the park over there." The policeman asked, why are you searching here then if you know you lost them over there? The drunk said, "This is where the light is. This is where the light was. Thought I could find it." And in a lot of ways, this parallels what we're doing with our field research. What are the main things we target? We target sounds, be they grunts, whoops, calls, roars. We target tree knocks, stone clacks. We target structure. We target footprints. That's where the big folks in the field, Meldrum, Moorhead, Tim, I'm forgetting his name. There's David Ellis is one of them, and there's another gentleman who analyzes Bigfoot calls to see if they have the Bigfoot call distinct signature and also contain infrasound. So this is where the seminal researchers in our field are shining the light for us, right under that light, and making a brighter light around those things. But in fact, there's keys laying all over the place to Sasquatch. But one of the things we do is we pick up and we only look where the light is shining. And it's my hope that through this series of my shows, you'll gradually come to understand how psychologic science can help bridge those gaps, help shine the light on some other keys, and more importantly, bridge the gap between experiential, phenomenological expeditions and scientific expeditions. Before we move on to that, though, for your consideration, the eye see only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. Robertson Davies. The eye see only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. So many people don't believe in Bigfoot. You're not going to get somebody to believe or to see or admit to Bigfoot if their mind isn't prepared to comprehend it. Similarly, as we're looking for other keys, the same process goes on. If you're not prepared to see other keys in other locations, you're going to miss them. On a expedition I was just on a couple weekends ago, during the day I was sitting relaxing in the sun, and a hunter came down. I thought he was in our Bigfoot group. There were 43 people on this expedition. And so I waved him on, "Come on, hey, how's it going? Come on, let's talk." And I had Hoss out of his working clothes, his collar, and his service dog outfit. So everybody else in the expedition by this point had seen Hoss and known what a good dog he was. But I also told people, when he's not dressed up to be a service dog, he can be an animal. He's a wild man. He's just 12 months old this month. And so the guy was a little leery about coming, and I said, "Come on in, we can talk. He's not going to bite you." And he asked what we were doing. "We're on a Bigfoot hunt. How about you?" "Oh, well, I'm here to hunt deer." And later on in the expedition, I heard what I thought was multiple tree pushdowns crashing into other trees. My research partner, Craig, he thought it was one tree being pushed down, and then he heard like a pop, 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 pop. When the expedition earlier when people came together and reported that in the larger expedition, they heard one tree fall, and then 4 gunshots. So that's just a great example of how our perception of things is informed by our thoughts and our experiences and what we're doing. The hunter, if he had heard that, he would have either thought it was gunshots or, just a tree naturally coming down in the forest. Whereas all of us Bigfooters, we heard that represented a sign of Bigfoot. So perception is informed by our experiences, and we're all there to see Bigfoot. We're more likely to attribute that experience to Bigfoot. Now back to Neil deGrasse. One of the biggest problems with the world today is that we have large groups of people who will accept whatever they hear on the grapevine just because it suits their worldview, not because it's actually true or because they have evidence to support it. The really striking thing is that it would not take much effort to establish validity in much of these cases, but people prefer reassurance to research. And, I think this is one of the issues with, I'm not saying experiential expeditions are bad. In fact, they're necessary. But, we've gotten comfortable in doing that when just setting out some experiments, just taking the data that's recorded during the expedition, coding it into numbers, and then analyzing those numbers to look for significant differences on different hypotheses could make the difference between it being an experiential research expedition and a scientific research expedition. And so this slide represents my own thoughts, and maybe I should have made the scientific circle, the blue circle, even smaller. But the majority of expeditions that are going out there, what they call research, is going out and trying to experience either seeing Bigfoot or finding Bigfoot sign. The footprints, having the tree knocks, the roars, the whoops, so on and so forth. And you can see where the blue circle, the scientific circle, overlaps the subjective phenomenological expeditions, that there's just a little overlap between science and subjective or phenomenological or experiential expeditions. And that's the expert shining the light on that overlap, represents the expert shining the light on where the key is, where the keys are. But there's a lot more out there than is just with those keys. Again, I don't want to suggest or degrade or defame experiential expeditions and say they're superior to scientific expeditions. The fact of the matter is, both of them have to work together. The experiential expeditions provide information to the scientific work. The experiential expeditions shine the light on where the scientific research needs to do with science and experimentation. Although we call the experiential expeditions research, many people wear that as a badge of honor and go as far as saying it's scientific research. And I don't mean, if you're one of those folks, I don't mean to criticize you, but the fact of the matter is not all research is scientific, and you can include elements of the scientific method. The last expedition I was on, they had a big map, and because they had 43 people on the expedition, they divided us up into groups of 4 or 5 and put some on one end of the state forest, others on the other end, some on the top, some on the bottom, and kept us spread out as far apart as possible so one group wouldn't experience or hear a provocation like a tree knock or a whoop. And we all carried microphones so that we would warn all other groups, hey, we're about to do a tree knock in 10 seconds. So if 10 seconds later another group heard a tree knock, they would know that it was our group doing that. And then the next morning in the debriefings, all the recorders in each expedition subgroup, recorders meaning writing notes and times of when they experienced certain things, we would get together and talk about what we experienced and when we experienced it, to allow the other groups to try and sync up and see if they experienced something similar at the same time, protecting us from misinterpreting our own noise or provocation. That's a very important part of the scientific process, and that is part of the scientific model. So I'm not saying they're devoid of the scientific process, but they don't complete the scientific process. So they're not science, unfortunately, whether you like it or not. Cuss me if you want. But before you cuss me, interestingly enough, this is a quote from the BFRO website. The use of subjective evaluation is what separates the legal perspective of witness testimony from the scientific perspective. Witness reports are considered anecdotal evidence by science, mainly because they are not testable. Yet many scientists are wise enough to understand that anecdotal evidence always precedes and leads to the collection of scientific evidence. In the history of science, scientific evidence has never been collected or even pursued until there has been enough anecdotal evidence or indirect evidence at hand to merit an effort to collect testable evidence. Thus, without the collection and evaluation of anecdotal evidence or indirect evidence, there would be no scientific discoveries at all. This is the intrinsic relationship between the two types of science. Citing reports by themselves are not scientific evidence, but what they lead us to is scientific evidence. And so the scientists need the experiential research expeditions, and the experiential expeditions need the scientists. We need to be working together instead of viewing each other as an adversary or excluding one for the other. So if I could wave a magic wand, this is what the future research paradigm would look like. We've got overlap between the subjective experiences and experiential expeditions, and we've got evidence in the scientific experimental expeditions, but there's still a small sliver of people that are just doing pure science, and there's still a small sliver of people on the left doing pure experiential researchers. We've got to include and cooperate with each other as opposed to remaining separate or divided from each other. And I think one of the biggest areas this comes into play is in woo phenomena. Most of the blood and what are they called? Flesh and blood researchers, they don't believe that woo stuff. And similarly, the woo folks, they don't believe that flesh and blood kind of stuff. Well, the neat thing about psychologic science is we're good at capturing intangibles. We cannot feel another person's emotion. We cannot directly know their intelligence. We cannot directly see inside their brain. What we can do is use other tools to measure a person's IQ, although that's not a direct measurement. It's an extrapolation or a symbol of that intelligence. The same with MRIs and CAT scans. These things aren't actually looking into your brain and going through your brain producing that picture. They are computer generated images of what your brain looks like through those radiographic tests. It's a computer generated image. It's not your actual brain. So we can't directly, and emotions, of course, psychology, we have all kinds of tests to measure personality, all kinds of tests to measure emotions. So you may say, well, you can see when somebody's frustrated, right? But you can't see that the emotion itself of frustration going on inside that person's brain or body. All you can see is either behavioral manifestations of that emotion or use psychologic tests to see or try to capture that emotion. It's a step away from the actual thing we're trying to measure or see. So this is why both science and experiential expeditions need to make friends and cooperate with each other. We need each other. One or the other by themselves will never help us prove the existence of Bigfoot. We've been doing experiential expeditions for more than 60 years. How far has it gotten us? Aside from the people who know Bigfoot, who have had a Class A sighting, no one else knows for sure. And even the people who do know through those Class A sightings, what happens with that? That gets reduced down to an anecdotal story or report, which is then classified into different classification systems. And so we need to cooperate with each other to get the proof. We need to begin to use statistics and numbers, because those are the language of science. And until we start speaking that same language, we're never going to be able to prove it. Get a body, you say. Well, if you got one, you better get two or three, because one body for science isn't going to be enough. You need replication in science. If DNA from one body shows this, we need another body to see that their DNA shows the same thing. You can't generalize from just one. You need three support legs for a stool to support a stool. But if you don't have that stool is going to tip one side or another. It's the same for Bigfoot proof. And yes, the funding and the money is a big part and a big problem in that process. Although, for those of you who aren't aware of Darby, I think his last name is Northcutt. Craig, you can correct me if I'm wrong. He's I'm not sure what he is. I think a biologist out of a big university in North Carolina, and he is conducting a comprehensive DNA analysis of Bigfoot hairs. Craig has submitted the more strands from the blonde Bigfoot hair that I have in my pendant here that I wear around my neck. He found those clumps and was nice enough to give some hair to me. Darby Orcutt. Okay, thank you, Jenky, very much. I appreciate that, bud. So, we've got a fresh new DNA study going on a university basis and taking the appropriate controls and other variables into consideration. So, let's hope. Oh, I'm sorry. Back to this. This is one of my few original thoughts or concepts. Organismic perceptual bias. Humans are a bias machine. And most of the time, you're not even going to know when you're biased, because bias is hardwired into our bodies through our central and peripheral nervous system. So, sensation and perception. When you reach down into a fire and pick up that smoking wood that's still really hot, scalding hot. From the time your hand grasps that extraordinarily hot piece of wood till that signal runs up your arm into your spinal cord, and the millisecond before it hits the brain, that's sensation. That's raw sensation. The millisecond it hits your brain, it becomes perception. And you drop the wood, you start cussing it. The bad news is our perception is informed by our life experience. You know, you show somebody a piece of Kentucky bluegrass, some are going to say it's blue, some are going to say it's green, some are going to say it's something in between. Those tree falls that I heard, Craig and I both experienced them as tree falls, but he heard 4 distinct pops. I just heard what I thought was 2 trees being pushed over simultaneously, and then hitting other trees and cascading down to the ground. And another group in the expedition, they heard it as 1 tree pushed down and then 4 gunfires. So that's a perfect example of how our expectations, our beliefs, how we process the sounds informs perception and can be biased. We had 6 people experience that same event, and Craig and I sitting right beside each other in the car, we didn't experience it the same. And then people in the group across the way, they heard it as 1 tree pushed down and then gunshots. So we bring that context to our experience, and that's perception. And does this guy have a YouTube channel? If you're asking about Craig, no, I've got him to myself, and I'm glad I do. But he would be an awesome YouTube channeler. And if you ever get a chance to go out with him, he just about, I don't want to say every week, but frequently throughout a month, he will post that he's going out tonight or today. Does anyone want to come along? He'll post it on Facebook. So look for those posts, and you can get together with him. I don't want to disclose where he lives because that's kind of giving away the site. But if you ever want to go out with him and you see him post something and you live in the area, I know he would welcome you. So back to how we're hardwired for science or for bias. You guys have seen this slide under the fight-flight series that I did. You got your brain on the right-hand side. You can see the brain. You can see the spinal cord going down. And each one of those red dots in the spinal cord is where the sympathetic division, the excitatory division of our nervous system, has nerves branching out to different locations of our body. Same on the right with the green, I think they're green dots, where the parasympathetic or the off switch or the calming switch comes. The point of this slide is that when we perceive things, it's hardwired into our body. Sensation is hardwired into our body. And the second part of it is that this millisecond it hits our brain, we have perception. And I've just made this point. Sensation and perception are hardwired into our brain. Our perception is formed by our life experiences and the context we're in. And as a result of our life experiences and the context we're in, that makes us a potential bias machine. And that's probably one of the most important points to take away from this. You may think you know it all. You may think you're unbiased, but our nervous system guarantees that we are biased. And we've got to be aware of different ways that we can become biased and try and control for those within ourselves. Any questions about that concept? Because it's a real important one. Okay. Earlier, and I'm sorry this slide is so small. Hopefully you can see it. I've talked about it in our earlier in the show, and talked about how expeditions themselves can create bias. And before I go any further, let me say that I am a believer in Bigfoot. I'm not doing this show because I don't believe. I'm doing this show because I believe, and because I'm hoping that psychological science can bring experimentation into the field work and get the proof we need to prove Bigfoot. So here's a slide on the birth of a biased Bigfoot theory. Typically, they're more likely to occur during a Class A or a Class B sighting, right at the top under the title. If you follow around to the right, when you have a Class A or Class B sighting, you're going to have a stress response. It's a positive thing because that's what you're there for, but even positive things are stressful. There's a test out there that lists all the stressors that can occur in a human being's life, and so many of them, like weddings, the birth of a child, getting a loan, getting a new job. All those things are positive events, but they still create a stress response. In a Bigfoot expedition, that stress response may or may not include a fight-flight response. But in that stress response, a large bias window develops. And I don't mean to trash anybody's religion, and I don't mean to offend, but if you've ever seen on television, or maybe it happens in your church, where healings are happening, and some of the more charismatic preachers, they will have the person stand in front of them and do a prayer, and then all of a sudden kind of almost slap them on the forehead, and these people fall down. Well, that slapping on the forehead creates a stress response and opens our mind up to suggestions. It can be explained as a hypnotic phenomena. Any stress response on an expedition develops and opens up that bias window. So you have your experience and your belief is expressed on a theory. Well, that must have been a Bigfoot, or, that was a Bigfoot shifting from one dimension into another. But what we do is we immediately jump to that as a theory. We don't call it a hypothesis. We call it a theory. We don't test that theory beyond going out the next time into the woods and hopefully having a similar or a same experience. When that happens, a biased Bigfoot theory is born. It's confirmation bias. We're having another experience that's close or the same as the one we had on the expedition, and so it must be a Bigfoot. And then the next experience you have, you're listening for Bigfoot. It can easily become a Bigfoot because of confirmation bias, and that process trails along until it just runs out of steam. Bigfoot truth. This guy is trying to slow everybody down when he has zero evidence. Absolutely nothing to show except a diagram. I have plenty of Bigfoot evidence, sir. Bigfoot truth. If you would tune in to some of my other shows, I tell a lot of my personal sighting stories. I've seen eye glow. I've seen footprints. I've seen footprint casts. I've heard roars. I've been grunted at by a Bigfoot, growled at by a Bigfoot, 20, 30 feet from where I was sitting. So I don't have the solid evidence. Maybe that you're looking for. You're looking for something concrete. And that's part of the reason I'm even presenting this presentation, because I'm trying to help people understand that we've got to do experimentation, boil the data down to numbers, do a statistical analysis, because science, if we're going to get science to accept Bigfoot, we're going to have to speak their language, and their language is numbers. They don't care about a film. They don't care about a picture. They don't care about a cast. If those things were enough, we would have already have it proven. So here's the difference: the birth of a scientific Bigfoot law. You have that same Class A or Class B and even a C sighting. If you attended the first 6 episodes of my show, you've learned how to modulate that stress response through techniques like stress inoculation, relaxation, things of that nature. So by learning to modulate your stress response, there's still a bias window opening, but it's not as big of a window is created. We develop a hypothesis, and note, it's a tentative hypothesis is born. We then test out that hypothesis. If that hypothesis is confirmed, it better informs, it goes up and informs a Class A or B or C sighting. If it's not confirmed, it's against that. That hypothesis then, coming up on the left, is repeatedly confirmed and is either accepted or rejected. Rejecting it lends further information and credence to, we don't need to continue to pursue this hypothesis. Positive response says we need to continue that retesting and reevaluation process. We go to a tentative theory. After we test some more hypothesis, a tentative theory is born. We then go through multiple studies involving that tentative theory, and if they continue the repetition of the positive findings, a law is born. Once you have a law is considered proven fact. And that's what we're going to need, in my opinion, to solve and prove that Bigfoot exists. Again, if we haven't proved it with pictures, foot casts, footprints, handprints, butt prints, feces, in 60 years, clearly that's not going to be enough. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble ignoring some of the naysayers in this audience. If you guys have any questions you want to directly address to me, by all means, please feel free. All you got to do is type them in big caps, and I'll be happy to address your question. Any questions? Again, please put your questions in caps. I caught Bodie's question. You can, well, number one, this is recorded. This is a recorded presentation, so you can lift it from the videotape. But if you want to contact me through a private message on Facebook, I will give you my phone number, and I can get your address, and I can send you an electronic copy of this entire presentation. In particular, these diagrams would be part of that, and you can do with it what it will. So we can tweak our hypothesis, and that's okay. Well, you know, if you continue with the same hypothesis that continues, as you see on the left, the negative blue lines that continue to be rejected, you better tweak your hypothesis, because if you don't, you're going to continue to get negative findings and the research is going to be worthless. So you either got to tweak your hypothesis and go through that same hypothesis testing again. A tentative hypothesis, test it and retest it until that hypothesis is confirmed. The hypothesis then repeated and confirmed by independent researchers, not just you. A tentative theory is born. Test and retest that theory. Let that theory be retested by other researchers, and eventually a law will be born. Questions? Okay, here we get it in. Oh boy, 750. Only on slide 13. I was hoping to get through 31 slides today. This may turn into a 3-parter rather than a 2-parter. But Bigfoot bias creators. There's something called the Hawthorne effect. A company's production was down, and they brought in a bunch of social scientists to try and study the group and figure out why production was down. Well, lo and behold, during the 2 weeks that those researchers were there, production skyrocketed, productivity skyrocketed. And as they looked at this closely, they discovered that just the very act of studying a group of people in a factory, just by the very act of them knowing that it was there, that influences their behavior. If you're into physics, which I am no expert, but I do remember some stuff, the Heisenberg principle is the parallel or the equivalent in physics. The more precisely the position of some particle is determined, the less precisely its momentum can be predicted from initial conditions, and vice versa. Studying one aspect of molecular activity interferes with another aspect of its activity. Sound waves, for example, if you look at them from the side, and you had a chance to do that when we looked at the elephant infrasound illustration, you can look at it from the side and it looks like a wave, or you see peaks. If you look at it straight on, it either looks like a line, or in physics, it's going to look at a particle. So the mere attempt to measure something changes the dimensions of that. And I guess I'd point out from that, even with scientific expeditions, combining with experimental expeditions, we're still not going to learn much about Bigfoot's natural behavior. Because, I believe it's true. They know we're here or there before we ever know they're there. So their behavior is going to be impacted by our presence. Now, some people would argue habituation. When Bigfooters think of habituation, we think about a spot where Bigfooters live, where people come to frequently. Another way to think about habituation is they get used to us, and eventually they begin to behave naturally. That's a whole show in itself as to whether that really happens or not. Confirmation bias. I think we're going to talk about this one and probably leave some time for some questions and a little tease for the next show. Confirmation bias, this is a psychological process, is the tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects our preconceptions, typically by interpreting the evidence to confirm existing beliefs while rejecting or ignoring conflicting data. Earlier in the show, I told the story about how a hunter might perceive those pushdowns. They might perceive them just as a natural tree naturally falling in the woods, and never think once about the possibility of Bigfoot doing that, because they're not out there with that mindset looking for Bigfoot. They're looking for deer or whatever their target game is. Confirmation bias has the potential to run rampant in big field research, especially that which seems to take a quantum leap from taking that observation and immediately attributing it to a theory, bypassing the very necessary steps of hypothesis testing, then theory testing to make it a law. Siberia visitor, you're welcome. Thank you. Investigator, no, we won't go on to this next one. So it looks like this is going to turn into a 3-part series. I've been advised after doing a 6-part series on reprogramming your fight-flight that I should try and keep my shows down to 2-part series, but this is too important to ignore the entire presentation. Typically takes me an hour and 15 minutes to an hour to present this at an expedition as a full presentation, but obviously you're not going to get there. We're going to get into investigator bias, demand characteristics, incredulity bias. What the F? There's no way that they could be interdimensional, because I just don't believe in interdimensional creatures. That's so far beyond my world of experience. There's no way it could be true. Anthropomorphism, or tendency to assign human characteristics and behavior to animals. Hardwired instinctual, well, I'm going to skip over that. Dissonance. Dissonance in Bigfoot. Biasing effect of illusions. We're going to look at these illusions and see how they relate to Bigfoot. I guess at that, I'll say good, well, I'll ask if there are any last minute questions. Well, thank you, Bodai. Take as many episodes as you need. This information is needed in the age of AI created photos. I agree. Thank you, Charlotte J. You're the first person to do that. I really appreciate that very much. My boss, Doug Highcheck and Alex Highcheck, and all the other 10 other podcasters really appreciate that. In December, we're going to dive into I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought here. Excuse me. Maybe next week you can go right into it if you have time at the end of the story. I'll jump right into where we left off and continue on through. Well, thank you very much. Even the naysayers, I appreciate your attendance. And appreciate all my regulars showing up. That I can't tell you how much that means to me. So I am going to wish you all and say to y'all, remember to keep your boots on the ground. Remember to keep your mind open, your boots on the ground, and your heart with your higher power. And I hope to see you next week. Good evening.
I see you running out of reason. Don't try to blame it on the seasons. Why you wanna walk away? When we began, swear we had something that would last. baby has the feeling best. Falling in was easy, how do I make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Oh, I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in was easy, how can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I will never let go of you. Tried and true. I will never let go of you. Tried and true. I will never let go of you. Tried and Have you had a change of heart? Can we go back to the start? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Tried and true.
Wanna do it all with you by my side. If you're in, meet me here tonight. Be brave and come along. I'll be alright. Promise we don't need no break light.